for the interest. Dr. Billington asked me to be the liaison between him and the advisory group that we'll be talking about today and the Copyright Reform Act, and trying to place the introduction of that measure into context of other items that are going on within the library faces. And what we do is both Dr. Billington and Ralph will be having some brief remarks to place in context, and since we've only got 1 hour, we want to spend most of the time in responding to the questions that you have. And so I can start right off with Dr. Billington and then Ralph. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for coming here today so we can talk about a subject we're all concerned with, which is the Copyright Reform Act of 1993. I have only a few remarks to make to leave time for Ralph and for Dan, and I hope we can, as Dan says, find time for questions. You probably already know what is in the Copyright Reform Act of 1993. To make a long story short, the act would remove one of the statutory incentives to copyright registration. That could reduce the number of works registered, and as a result, the number of variety of works made available to the library. The library and the Copyright Office missions could seriously be damaged. Legislation would also change the relationship between the librarian and the registrar, in large part by making the registrar a presidential appointee. And some new functions would be sent over to the office from the Copyright Royalty Tribunal, which the Reform Act apparently schedules for extinction. Some have said euthanasia. Now, I assume you also know what deep concerns this proposal has caused at all levels of the library. Raise uncertainties about the future of the library itself, of the Copyright Office, and our important century-old relationship on which the National Collection is really, in a fundamental way, based. We testified in firm opposition to the legislation, which looked like it was set to run on a very fast track. We have, I think, slowed things down a little bit, and we find ourselves now with at least some breathing space. Now, the first thing to say is that the bill was a surprise. I was not only surprised, but troubled and frustrated at our collective inability subsequently to get the world outside to appreciate what this institution, and I very much include the Copyright Office in it, means to our society generally. What we are doing is turning the Copyright Reform Act 1993 into something our successors may ultimately count as a positive thing. We're trying to turn what was a very real problem, still is in many ways a very real problem, into something of an opportunity. Our work with the Congress on this legislation can become another testimonial to the library's capacity for self-examination and positive change. Since the bill was introduced and hearings held, Dan and I have been meeting with congressional sponsors and staff, authors, and copyright owners whose interests seem to be involved, and many others. We've tried to get everyone to assess the issues rationally and objectively. On the basis of our talks, I believe the sponsors of the Reform Act sought 4 objectives. First, to eliminate discrimination against American copyright owners by relieving them from an obligation not imposed upon copyright owners of other Berne Convention countries. Secondly, to ask the very practical question, whether copyright owners, particularly individual authors, are really hurt by having to register as a precondition to collecting compensation for attorney's fees, that is, assuming that they win their case. Third, to determine whether the costs of registration and deposit to certain registrants outweigh the benefits to the public, that is, in terms of materials going to the library or information getting into the copyright database. And fourth, to ask whether the Copyright Office needs to be strengthened politically and bureaucratically through the prestige of a presidential appointment, particularly if it is given important new responsibilities now carried out by the Copyright Royalty Tribunal. Now, a few weeks ago, I wrote to Chairman Hughes to say I recognize issues raised in the bill. I wanted to reassure him and Senator DeConcini that we had no intention of ignoring problems of discrimination against American authors or problems of fairness to individuals under the present system. True, we think the bill as it stands puts important public interests at risk, but that's a matter of means, not necessarily ends, and I pledged to Chairman Hughes and DeConcini that we would make a prompt, effective study to develop proposals for amending their bill in a way that the library and the office could support. In short, I regard this bill as a means of at least potentially strengthening the system, not eliminating it in the guise of some kind of reform. Chairman Hughes has made clear to me his support for both the Copyright Office and the library, and what has emerged out of the early disagreements is a framework in which I think some useful work can be done. On May 18th, I appointed an advisory committee to give us the benefit of its wisdom derived from long experience in copyright, librarianship, and scholarly research. It is headed jointly by Bob Wedgeworth.
Budget cuts.
The dramatic gesture. This is also on our agenda, unfortunately. This commission is to be headed jointly by Bob Wedgeworth, known well and respected in the library and copyright communities, and Barbara Winger, a former register of copyrights and a great friend of the library. The advisory committee is designed to help us re-examine the registration deposit relationship and how the copyright law and the needs of the National Library interact. This is not a national commission to investigate anything. There was some call for that, for sort of kind of blue ribbon panel to be formed under congressional guidance with the sort of formality appropriate to such a commission. I believe, however, that we can look at ourselves objectively. We have a group of talented people on this advisory committee willing to give their views to us on the matters raised in the Copyright Reform Act. They can deepen our understanding of how this system works in fact rather than in theory. They can help us craft incentives to registration and deposit that pass the test of fairness to authors, to the public's need for a copyright registry, and to future generations that will look to the library for the record of their nation's culture. Now, I understand that Ralph has already given you a copy of the press release announcing the advisory committee. After consultation with members of my management team, I decided we need several different sorts of advice. First, if the basic job is to develop new incentives to registration and deposit, we need to talk with the people to whom those incentives are supposed to appeal. What benefits are fair? What incentives are valuable? To whom? For what kind of materials? These are questions that lawyers and dealers in copyrighted works have not been systematically asked in a long, long time. Implicit in Chairman Hughes and DiCassini's effort is the notion that it has been too long a time. Second, we need to know far more about how materials acquired through copyright get into the library's collections. What materials will be needed in the future, and how will they be obtained, and what happens to materials which come to the Copyright Office but do not make it into the library's collections, at least on the first cut. In response, I wish to satisfy the practical demands of the present with our desire to serve what will, of course, are ultimately the unknown needs of the future, but which are nonetheless part of our responsibility. Are we gaining through copyright enough of today's popular culture, for instance, in order to select what social scientists will be interested in 25 or 50 years from now? Congress needs to know why a very wide river of copyright deposits must flow through the library. Several members of the advisory committee were selected precisely because of their experience in using the library's collections, in some cases building these collections through copyright, as, for instance, Alan Fern, who was the present photographs here in the Library of Congress for many years, and Barbara Ringer in the Copyright Office itself. And third, we need to know about how the copyright registration deposit system can be improved as it concerns information products, particularly the computer programs and electronic and machine-readable publications of the digital future. Several members of the advisory committee are involved in those areas. Tomorrow, the advisory committee will have its first meeting. It will largely be devoted to scheduling work, identifying issues that must be studied, and data that needs collection. We must develop proposals for the Congress by September 1st, which is not very much time. Now, the advisory committee is just that. It's here to advise. The task of forwarding proposals based upon that advice is yours and mine, and that is where your help is very much needed and is going to be called on a good deal in what we hope is going to be an open and a constructive process. We're going to establish working groups drawn from staff to meet with working groups of the advisory committee. to develop information, to discuss issues, and to make their own proposals. It's all go through now necessarily because the advisory committee has not settled its own working agenda. As soon as that happens, we hope by the end of this week, I will be talking with Ralph and the management team, and we will consult staff and propose a number of staff working groups. And these groups will be very important and integral and important part of the process. Those of you who join will have a lot to do with our success in making practical proposals to Congress and turning this into a constructive and important process for the history of the library and of the office. And I'm sure we can do it by September 1st. Why? Because of the professionalism that you all have, and because you can work with the rest of us to get the job done. You are a key part of this, and we really were going to count on a lot of participation and a lot of ideas. We're planning to brief Senator DeConcini soon on the value of the copyright deposit for the library's collection and America's collective memory. It will be similar to a briefing from Mr. Hughes, which I think he found very useful. It's my hope that we'll continue to work with the Congress to demonstrate the integral and crucial role that copyright sustains for the Library of Congress, and your help in this endeavor is going to be extremely important. So I thank you for coming today, and I thank you prospectively for the help that I know you are going to give to make this into a constructive and important process for the development of the office and the library. Thank you all very much, and Ralph, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Boynton. I think I speak for all of us here today when I say that it's a great pleasure to welcome you, our boss, to your copyright office. You first talked to us soon after you became librarian back in 1987-88. We have very pleasant memories of that first encounter, and I hope you can come back to give us a status report at some point in the not-too-distant future. I hope it'll be an upbeat report and one that spells a happy ending to this whole exercise. I really have very little to add to what Dr. Billington has already said. I know that all of us are reassured by his actually being here and by the things that he said. As I mentioned in my Christmas message to you earlier this year, in which I predicted that the Copyright Office faced very little change, talk about a clouded crystal ball. I quoted the Bible and said that to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven. This is a season of change in Washington, and the Copyright Reform Act of 1993 is part of that era of change. Although it took us by surprise, it anticipates many of the currents that were already running in the Copyright Office. Mike Pugh and Louis Flax were already thinking innovatively about the shape of the Copyright Office in the year 2000. In March of 1992, just a little bit more than a year ago, I'd sent a memorandum to Dr. Billington outlining our tentative plans for reinventing, realigning, reaffirming the important roles played by the library and the Copyright Office in promoting the public good. So the Copyright Reform Act is part of that process, and maybe it moves up our timetable by a year or two, but it is still part of that creative brainstorming that this giant budget crunch that we're in the middle of would have forced on us sooner or later anyway, whether we liked it or not. I asked your help, as did Dr. Billington. We are already considering changes in our regulations that will ease some of the burdens of the current system on a few groups of creators that all of you know all about already. People like the visual artists, like the photographers, and like some of the computer programmers. We need your input. We want to bring these people back into the copyright system. In many ways, they're frozen out under the current regime. And we want to make the system work better for all of us, not only the users of the system in terms of the copyright creators, but also the people who rely on the materials generated by the copyright system and by the people who use the extraordinary and unique records of the Copyright Office. And I ask your help on the staff working groups that Dr. Billington mentioned. We'll try to work out a procedure that gives all of you a chance to get your oar in the water. All of us are collectively, I think, a great national treasure. And I know that Congress would never do anything that would jeopardize you or the work that you do. I urge all of you, in the face of all of this uncertainty, to keep doing your usual great job, for which I am grateful, for which Dr. Billington is grateful, and for which the entire country is grateful. Help us direct this era of change into constructive channels. 10 years from now, perhaps 3 years into the 21st century, we'll look back and thank Congress for having prodded us into this very positive exercise. It's a soul-searching exercise. Congress has given us, as Dr. Billington said, a great opportunity, and let's all of us make the most of it. Thank you very much.
Church usher, and I can go far over here, one over here, and here. So any of you standing that you'd like to sit down, come and sit. You're welcome to take some chairs, okay? We do want to start taking questions. I do want to put a few things into context. When we're talking about the September 1st date, the first thing is to note that that's for the discussion of focus on 411A and 412. The more general question about the relationship of the Copyright Office to the Library of Congress, we were given by Mr. Hughes of March 1st. Now, we have some hope that when we meet with Mr. DiConcini, we might be able to expand those dates to get some more time on this, as far as the advisory group work is concerned. So I just wanted to, that's what we're focusing on as far as the immediate time frames are concerned. Secondly, to underscore the fact that we have met with both Mr. Hughes, Mr. Moorhead, Senator Hatch, and Senator DiConcini, and everyone to a person, commends the Copyright Office and its work, and the work that is being done, and that no harm is to come to the library. That's their stated intention. Now, also to be mentioned that we got a letter signed by all 4 leadership members in response to the advisory group meeting, saying that they will also hold some public committee meetings in which they would also like participation on part of the advisory group. So you're going to have public dialogue on which this is taken. Everything that the advisory group is getting, the points and the working papers are all subject for you to take a look at. This is an open process by which we need your ideas. There's already been one working group, Larry McGarkle right here, thank you Larry, has been working with collection services on the impact of the bill on the collections, and that, and among others, I think also worked here in the Copyright Office, and that report is on its final form. I know Marilyn Kritzinger also worked on it, among others, and that is just a beginning of a whole series of major working groups from you who know the operations, know the collections, and the interrelationship that's going on. This is the sort of input we need to provide facts. The members are Mr. Hughes explicitly stated with regard to this measure that he likes to put ideas forward. He doesn't mean them to get people alerted to and to start the dialogue. So he certainly has started a fire among us. He's caught our attention, which was his intention, and so that we need to then respond appropriately in a measured and fashion based on facts, and that's what we hope to be able to provide. And of course, you are the ones from which we can do that. There ought not to be anything that I'm aware of basically documents that are being circulated, ideas that are on the table, you should have access to. I know, for instance, the new Copyright Notices has an interview with Barbara Ringer. She lays out the process about her viewpoint on what took place as far as founding the advisory group and what's taking place. We hope that all this is in. Anytime you need information, then you give us a call so that you can know what's going on, so you don't feel left out. Now, can we start with some questions, please? Yes. Hi.
I'm trying to understand, are 411A and 412 already out? Have they?
No. They are. It's looking at those provisions. There's no giving up on anything. It's looking at the impact of 411A and 412 and alternatives for 411A and 412, which in fact the subcommittee liked us to look at. They are not. It's just the question, if we came back and told the Congress we can't find any other viable alternatives for copyright inducement for copyright registration and deposit than this, then that would be our response. Then we'd have to give a very reasoned justification for that. But we're concerned about both deposit and the impact on the collections as well as authors' rights. Another question? Going once? Yes, ma'am.
When you said if we need information, give us a call on what number are you talking about?
Well, I'm sorry? Oh, okay. Gail Harris, right there. Gail, could you raise your hand? And you can give your extension?
5877.
5877. And we'll have a little advertisement on her on C-SPAN. Sure.
We do want to ensure that there is not just a complete shutdown of the Copyright Office, and this will be done in an orderly fashion to make sure that the contributions are coming in from across the whole Copyright Office and not decimating one unit or another unit. So we will be consulting with all of the members of the organization in trying to spread the richness around as equitably as possible, and we'll be working with Gail on that process. But we do encourage all of you to keep in mind the fact that we do need help.
Well, that's, as I understand it, particularly for the working groups. Right, but general informational questions, what's happening today, that sort of thing, Gail can tell you as far as what the working group, the advisory group is and what they're doing. Another question? Yes, sir.
Will the advisory group be holding public hearings?
There will be times where their deliberations will be open. The first one, because they're setting the agenda, is one that it's in the librarian's conference room. It's not so much of it, but there will be, where they'll be talking the agenda and there'll be open times. Isn't that, Eric? That's true. We'll be trying to have some, for instance, in here. And being able to do that. And in addition to that, there'll be the open committee deliberations or committee meetings that will be held with the House and Senate subcommittees, which will have some advisory group members and other outside public members as well. Yes, ma'am.
Do you anticipate providing at least some space at the congressional hearings for the Copyright Office staff to go? Such as when we had the revision bill of 708 was being prepared in the years before 78, we were able to go to some of the hearings.
We probably could work that out on an ad hoc basis. Of course, there are no congressional hearings immediately contemplated. They presumably would follow after the recommendations of the advisory committee.
I think you're talking about those open meetings that they're...
Oh, the open meetings. I thought you mentioned Congress. The open meetings would be...
There's congressional meetings that they plan on having as well.
Well, great. Yeah, I think we can make those arrangements, and we'll plan to do so.
Yes, sir.
Does this have any effect on the coming fiscal year as far as the Copyright Office's budget is concerned?
We can't take into account, because there's no way to knowing what the provisions will be this fiscal year. As it is, I'll leave that to Ralph when he has a chance, is that the House Committee on Appropriations reported out the legislative branch bill yesterday, and it has, for the library as a whole, as all the legislative agencies, a 1% cut. That's $3 million, which is, and it's a consequent proportionate cut for the Copyright Office as well. That cut is off this fiscal year. So we're looking at reductions that are painful, because usually when you're looking at an operating budget, you're dealing with about a 6% mandatory raises, and that's not taken into it, which has been reduced this year because none of us are getting pay raises in fiscal year 94 currently. But there may be some complications because it's up in the air with regard to the issue of locality pay. But the Reform Act itself and its potential budgetary impact cannot be, because we just have no idea what's going to evolve out of this policy process and dialogue.
Let me say just a word about that, because the budgetary pressure is quite severe, and as Dan has told you, we've just got a mark that's not what we would have hoped. One of the ways the fact that there is this general budgetary pressure, I mean, it's not just on us, it's on the whole government, and hitting with particular strength in some ways in terms of pressure on the legislative branch agencies. But that gives an added importance to this kind of a study itself, because you develop and you re-articulate and you develop a rationale, the fundamentals of which I think we're quite confident about. That is to say, the importance of the registration system, the importance of the copyright data, and the importance of the national collections of the library. But these become strengthened by examining alternatives, by looking at the whole range of things, so that we have a rational, fully thought out, and not relying, because one of the things that the successive budget crises, and there's no relief in sight on this, are confronting us with constantly, is that just traditional rationales, that it's always been there and it seems to be working fine, really are not enough to strengthen your case. And so I think we strengthen our case by processes of self-examination like this, and we strengthen our case by taking control of it ourselves, so that we are taking the initiative rather than being acted upon. And that's what we've tried to do in this case. So the budget thing goes on and will go on quite irrespective of what happens in individual parts of the library. But I think one strengthens the case for copyright by this kind of a self-study exercise, and indeed we may come up with some ways and some approaches and some ideas that will be helpful for us and be able to demonstrate not only the need for what we do, but the efficiency and the capacity for self-improvement that's part of it, which is what people are looking for more and more in government. So I think it's we have these crises which are going to be there regardless of this problem, but I think this is another aspect of how we can turn a problem, I think, into an opportunity.
Hi, yes.
I think that all the things that Dr. Billington has said are absolutely true, and that self-examination is a worthwhile exercise. But this is not the first self-examination we've had. We went through this process when the United States joined the Berne Convention in 1989, which was, after all, not that long ago. At that time, Erwin Karp and others made their arguments for small authors. We went through it on an agency-wide basis during the MAP proceedings, which were long, arduous, and hit every staff member to some extent. My question is, why was no one from the Copyright Office involved in the advisory committee process, in the sense that, we're operating for users on the outside, but we also have knowledge that might help in deciding how to do things better and more efficiently, if that's what we're really looking for.
You're looking in the advisory committee group itself?
Right.
Okay. The advisory group is an outside advisory group. The crucial point of evidence, as mentioned before, will be the working groups that will be composed of Copyright Office and other library people in their interaction. For example, we know the Motion Picture Broadcast and Recorded Sounds uses the catalog record produced by Copyright for its own cataloging efforts. I mean, that's a good sell. That's a noble point for cost effectiveness, what have you. And those will just be multiplied, presumably. The outside group is what it is. It's an outside advisory group to represent outside perspectives of the operation and the impact of the Copyright Office and Library of Congress. The crucial point for evidence finding and fact finding will be those working groups, and they'll be the ones that will be providing the information.
Well, will the working groups be responding to the direction of the advisory group, or will the working groups be operating, more independently or within an office context?
That would be operating within office context, responding to questions raised and requests for information from the advisory group. We need to be responsive to the outside community that Congress is itself responding to and meeting questions. We provide the evidence. They say, this is the case because of X, Y, Z, and saying, well, here's ABC and the facts, and this is the case. It's a part of the public dialogue. Okay? All right. Yes. Hi, Jeff.
You're describing the research into the Copyright Office operations. Can you, or do you have any sense of what the research into the legal system outside of the Copyright Office will be? How will they look into the effects of the legislation, possible effects of the legislation on the court system?
Well, that's a good question. I presume that we'll have to be looking at, for instance, back, if I understand it, Ralph can address it further, is that it was when they were looking at this earlier before, the administrative court, the Office of the Administration of the Court said that, in fact, that pointed out the cost-saving efforts that the examining function performed as far as cutting back on the number of challenges in the courts. And so that would be a point of fact and further pursuit. We've already made, I think, formal inquiry. Do we not?
And they have responded.
I'm sorry.
We have already made a formal inquiry in the case of the Copyright Reform Act of 1993, and they came back with essentially the same response that they came to us with back in 1989 during the Byrne revision, the Byrne adherence procedures, and their view was that any diminution in the number of registrations or any reductions in the examination of claims to copyright by the Copyright Office will result in more litigation in the courts, more complex litigation, more expense to the court systems, more expense to the taxpayers, and that given their druthers, they would love to keep the current system that keeps the Copyright Office as an integral part of the judicial process.
Thank you. And I presume, Jeff, that would be a further question to take a look at for further elaboration, perhaps. Another question? Yes, sir.
What's the congressional timetable right now for this?
The congressional timetable is, as I mentioned before, September 1st for the focused on the 411A and 412, and March 1st for some of the larger questions placed in context. We hope that we can get some flexibility on both those deadlines expanded a little bit after we talk with the Senate. These are deadlines that were set by the House, particularly Chairman Hughes.
So there is no deadline to bring this before the entire body at this point?
No. Now, we have some, and Charlotte's here, may speak to this, because Hayden Gregory, who was the staff director for Mr. Hughes, again, was budget 1.1%. Thank you. It's more than you think. That they are holding off on on the provisions, waiting for it to be in, but they are still intent, is our understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Charlotte, on the CRT and the presidential appointment. They're still focused on that. And so then they, as part of the libraries, that's a very major concern on the part of the Library of Congress.
So they could act on that anytime?
Well, we are working on that as a parallel issue. It's not the top issue as far as the advisory group is concerned, but it's the top issue as far as the Library of Congress is concerned, to maintain the current appointment process of the register, as well as the fact that we've maintained that Dr. Billington, as a presidential appointment, can in fact, under constitutional laws, under separation of powers doctrine, have in fact that executive function of changing the CRT function to arbitration functions and place it within the library. That's been our position, and we haven't had any significant counter-public argument against that, which we need to respond to. So, but the issue is still there. Yes, sir?
Will the advisory group be studying the CRT issue?
Yeah, presumably they'll be looking at it. They've identified it in their for-prong, but it's not, I mean, they have right now a very tight deadline for a very complex issue. But I'm sure that they'll be placed within context and looking at the CRT issue, but it's not the top priority. Is that correct, Eric, at this point?
No. Of course, the advisory group hasn't had its first meeting yet, so tomorrow we'll see, but the top priority has to be the registration issues at this point, because that was the timetable set for us by the House. And whether or not they also want to look at the Copyright Royalty Tribunal and the presidential appointment process is something that they may or may not decide to do in the context of these advisory committees, because frankly, some of the members of the advisory committee have said that those are very difficult political issues that they don't necessarily want to take positions on. And it may be something for the librarian to respond to directly without the assistance of the advisory committee.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Do you anticipate setting up any process like you had when you started, Matt, of having suggestions from individual people to be channeled?
Again, through Gail and certainly through the Register as well as Gail as far as the advisory group and obviously the questions and issues that arise on there. That when you see a document on something that you have questions on as well. Charlotte, you want to say something?
I just wanted to say that to underscore that the advisory committee has not met yet. It's not going to make that much difference if I stand there. but the advisory committee has to consider just that process that you asked about, the process of how to get in all the information and from people outside, and also how to get back information, because they are aware that, and they will be aware that people are interested in the process and how to get the information back to people. So that will be one of the first things that the advisory committee will have to look at.
And also Eric?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, which is to say that those of us in the Copyright Office, the few of us who have been asked to assist the advisory committee, Charlotte, myself, and Gail and Louis Flax, would like to recommend to the advisory committee that we can act as an information source for all of you for when the meeting space, for example, is too small for the advisory committee meetings, for those of you who want to attend, that we'll be able to come out of the meetings and give you in some formal or hopefully informal ways like this or in written materials, a briefing on what's happening and what issues have been raised and where the advisory committee, what directions they're going. And I guess the only thing we'll ask is that you don't kill the messengers.
Yeah.
Speaking of tricky political issues, a lot of us, as I'm sure you're aware, when this first came down, it sounded sort of suspicious because we were hearing from just a few industries at the hearing, and all of a sudden there was this fast track, and it said, well, why redo the whole system based on some specific complaints from visual artists and the computer industry? And we still haven't heard a lot from other industries that would make us understand why do we need this major rehaul?
Well, there has been, and Rob can point to this much better than I, is that you have had other industries and the library community coming in, because the fact is a lot of people didn't know, we got relatively short notice. Was it, 6 days? No, 2 weeks. 2 weeks before the announcement and the actual presentation of the hearing. And particularly when you're dealing with large voluntary associations or even trade associations, you have to touch base with your board of directors, your membership, before you take a response on a legislative issue. And so and those responses are coming in from the different trade groups. Like magazine publishers comes to my mind, and the American Library Association came very strongly also with communication. And so that's the time frame that you're dealing with. And it's quite clear, I think, both in the House and the Senate, that there was a lot of saying, "Whoa, wait a minute, what's going on here?" Sort of response from the creative community as well as the library community and what have you. Not to juxtapose librarian creativity, but the point is that there is now much more exposure to the issues, the impact of the Reform Act. That's not to say that there aren't issues that Mr. Hughes particularly is interested in, but again, for fear of being repetitive, meeting with the chairman and the ranking members, that there is explicit saying that they do not want to harm Copyright Office or the Library of Congress, and they'll do it, and that they're not going to move precipitously. That commitment has been made.
I guess the reason behind it is, why did this come about if they had only gotten in touch with 2 industries and we're still not even hearing from that many? How did they come to
I'm sorry, I can't really speculate as to what those motivations are, what have you. I can tell you as the situation is now. And the situation is now that you have a public dialogue, you have a number of you have the Congress willing to accept the fact that the library is going to look at the issues in a public manner, in a reasoned manner, with experts fed by facts and deliberation on the part of the people who know best, and that the people who do the day-to-day work here. And that is going to be presented to Congress and subject to public debate. And I'm quite confident that in the public debate we will win what we feel is the best course. But that's where you call upon the people who use the copyright, who are aware of it, and hopefully out of this, I must say, in the context, this is that'll raise awareness of the value of the copyright and what the contributions do make, and it's from the library's perspective, it's very good because copyright's done its job so well and goes along. It's forgotten sometimes that when people complain about the cost of Congress and they call about cutting Congress, it means cutting copyright. And that to the extent there's greater visibility in the public dialogue, it has looking at the glass half empty and half full, that it brings more to light to members of Congress that an important function for the nation, both in trade and its economy, comes out of monies in the legislative branch. And so that when you have fresher members who say, I'm going to cut Congress 25%, and we'll be facing floor amendments tomorrow that we'll be doing our best to fight, the cutting across the board cuts in the legislative branch, they're also cutting national services, including a very important service, the copyright. Yes, sir.
In light of this new panel, what's the status on the Senate hearings now? They were supposed to be held in July, I believe.
Well, right now, our latest understanding, I can correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, would be late fall for the Senate. There's a tacit agreement to wait until the libraries had a chance to review and deliberate and respond to some of the issues.
I think the only thing that they might have in the House or Senate instead of formal hearings would be something like the town meetings that Dr. Billington and Dan were talking about, where they might have sort of an issues open forum for discussion, but not necessarily directed towards moving the bill forward. But I think we do have the tacit agreement, the explicit agreement from the House and Senate to hold off until at least their preliminary recommendations are made, or the advisory group's recommendations are made in September, and beyond that, it's very difficult to predict what the House and Senate subcommittees will do.
Yes, ma'am.
How and when will the working groups be formed?
Once the agenda is set from the advisory group, and then they're saying, what facts do we need? And identified. So I would presume some of them will be called for next week. As indicated by the one that I had identified earlier. That was one that had been started off shortly after we got the notification of the hearings, looking at what are the impacts of the proposed language, the copyright reform, on the collections. And we did as quick as we can within a 2-week period, but a more deliberative process of getting, that we can be much more confident on the numbers that Lyra, among others, had worked on. And that report's just about done. Isn't that true, Len? And so that's an example, and we just anticipate that others will coming out of that process.
On this question, I believe that we were really taken completely by surprise on this. So when you ask, what's the origins of it, it's very difficult to piece it together, because when you're hit out of left field with something, you didn't see it coming, and you got to reel a little bit and then figure out, well, why were they throwing a curveball from this side of the diamond? When the game's going on over here, we thought. I think we have had a very useful educational effect in taking a very strong stand in the hearings, explaining the fundamental principles, which these have to be, Jefferson said you got to re-explain it all every 20 years. Anyhow, you've got to re-explain these things to people who've taken them for granted. I think this is also part of the educational process, because I found in working up those hearings in a very short space of time, we wanted to say comparative things about what the experience of other systems is, and we used the Canadian example, but we didn't really have all that precise information about the comparable foreign experiences too. So we have a chance now to work up more information. There's a lot of things where we have answers that we've given, but we need to take another look at them, look at the facts, so that we have a kind of authoritative, we can conduct a fairly authoritative educational campaign. So I think there's going to be a lot of need for this advisory commission on factual backup, analysis of other people's processes, and so forth. But it's part of the same thing. I mean, there's no contradiction between taking a very firm stand at the hearing and then coming up with a mechanism like this, because it's a way of continuing the fundamental educational process and making sure that as far as possible the library is itself in control of its own agenda. Now you have to bring in external advisors because they bring in expertise, they bring in experience outside. Somebody said, well, we've studied this in the map. So, well, the whole point about the map thing was to stress, once again, that conceptually, the way the library is organized, the way it reacts is in terms of service to its constituents. So we're getting back a lot of people that we serve on this advisory council, as well as quite a number of people that have a deep feeling for and knowledge of libraries and what the connection here really means. But you have to bring in, you have to have a nice combination, which I think this presents us, between the additional expertise and experience that comes from without, so that it validates and gives an added input of ideas, and then a strong group effort from the various working groups from within. So I think it gives us a strong way of containing it. It doesn't mean that we're backing off or going to back off things that are of fundamental importance. It does mean that we're going to open up for a fresh look at everything, so that we can go back and say we're quite confident that the most important things will survive any kind of scrutiny because they're based on, but you don't want to just be, as some institutions are, just vaguely alluding to tradition and coming up with something that's been repeated without being restudied. So I think it's a pretty constructive process, and I think, but it's only going to be that if we have your help and your cooperation. We tap into the ideas and thoughts and knowledge that's embedded in all of you.
Yes, sir.
Now you mentioned that the budget cut is significant, but this is a separate issue. And we could come out on top as far as copyright reform is concerned, but what's going to happen to us vis-a-vis the budget cut? Are we going to be involved in planning on that process? Are we going to have any say or information?
It's really still too early to be talking specifics in this area. We just have the house mark. We do think that the Copyright Office is in better shape this year with the cuts than it has been in the past, because Congress has finally recognized that it's irrational to extract the 1.1% cut from the receipts as well as the appropriation. So the 1.1% cut will come only from the appropriation side of the budget, which is only 1/3 of our budget. So we're in better shape than we would be otherwise. But I think we're going to wait for the entire process to firm itself up before we start making specific plans as to what we're going to do. And I assure you, as you have been in the past, you will be fully consulted on what we do and how we do it in the future.
I failed to mention another report that had been done in preliminary fashion, more extensive, was our colleagues in the Law Library, done a comparative study of copyright deposit in other countries, and that is, I think, continuing in a more elaborate fashion. I did want to mention that as well. Are there other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Will there be an opportunity or a channel for non-management staff to contribute their ideas about?
Well, as I mentioned before, there's the process in calling Gail Harris at the number with any ideas for that at any point, both for points of information and issues to be raised. That is one, and then I'll let Ralph also speak to that.
Well, I think, as I hope all of you know, with our dedication to consultative management, we involve all of the staff all of the time, and I suspect that we will do that in this process as well. I will personally guarantee that the people who want to be heard will be heard. I've been getting many memos from staff that have been very useful. They're part of the process. If you have something that you want to commit to paper and send to me, I will be happy to receive it, and I will share it forthwith with Gail and Eric and Louis and Charlotte and Barbara and everyone else who wants to read it. So you're part of the process, and regardless of your place in the hierarchy, your voice will be heard.
Yeah. Jackie, you had a question?
I guess I'll be a bit to say this, but I haven't really heard anything to make me feel comfortable about my job. Well, I'm just using myself.
Yeah, sure.
But I think the basic thing that was really surfacing and going around throughout the office was the decrease in staff in the office and the possibility of some people not having jobs or sections being made very small. I really haven't heard anything that would give us any assurance through all of it that someone is looking out for the employees or for the staff per se. I'm not really sure what position the working group or the advisory group has, and who's the mediator between that and who's really looking out for us. I just don't feel that.
Okay. Well, I understand the uncertainty, but the fact when you're dealing with legislation and with the language and what might come out, we can't hold out any assurances that are fast and hold. What we can tell you is that, first of all, and there's more likelihood, as far as some people in the library being harmed or by the budget cuts than the Copyright Reform Act. We got something concrete to dealing with that. It's doable, and copyright, as Ralph just mentioned, is much better off than other parts of the library. So if you look at your neighbor, you're better off, immediately. But again, it's all preliminary. We don't know what's going to happen on the House floor. We have indications, but it's effect. So it's something to take to account. As far as the Copyright Reform Act, that's what we want to hear from you. This is that there is, to the extent possible, everything will be done to ensure that the Copyright Office is held intact. As I mentioned to you before, the only concrete language that I can see right now that is immediately forthcoming is the question of the adding on functions, and that's the CRT arbitration functions on there, and the affecting of the registrar's position. That's the most concrete I can get to you now. Is that those rumors and what might happen, across the board are based on, if you take a look at the draft bill, we all know in legislation what is proposed initially can take many permutations and changes along the way. And they may have consequences and functions within the institution, but employees' rights, as always, will be protected. Seniority is there and what have you. But before we even leap to that, we have to take a look at the language that we have. We'll do everything that we can possible to lay out the practical ramifications of any proposal. That, I think, is a responsible thing to do. So the question is that if certain functions are going to change and be replaced, they will have an impact on our lives. But we'll try to lay that out as much as possible. At this point, part of our job will be, when we take a look at the options that are there, what's the day-to-day impact on operations? And that's in part what the working group is to do. How do we do our jobs? What's the best way to do them? What's the impact of legislative language? I'm sorry that's not, I'd like to give you more of assurances. The only assurance is the library is doing everything it can to protect all its employees. We don't want to lose anyone, and we're not going to have anyone in change. That certainly is, because the fact is that we're losing people is because Congress as a whole is reducing government. That, I think, is the major concern, and I think ought to be, and it's part of a much larger picture with regard to government. But the impact of Reform Act is much more fluid at this point.
Let me say, you said who is looking after? Well, let me tell you, I'm looking after that. Mr. Mulholland and the Congressional Liaison Group, which works about 14 hours a day and most weekends, is spending full time practically looking on that. This institution lost 500 people in the 1980s. We've begun to make a climb back. But this doesn't happen. It takes a lot of work on a lot of people's part. It takes a much greater sales job than we've ever done in the Library of Congress generally. That's basically what the number of our jobs is all about. So you can rest assured, there were all kinds of rumors swirling around when we had our MAP study and the reorganization and so forth that we were trying to cut people out. I can tell you that to do the job that's necessary here, we actually need more people rather than less. This is we need higher skills rather than less. So it's never been part of our thinking that there's that reduction in the number of people changes maybe increasing the quality and the diversity of what people do. But this institution is badly strapped. So you have people that are deeply concerned about this who are working hard at it. We are working in a very difficult environment. It has been a very difficult environment now for a couple of years, and it's getting more difficult because of these more or less categorical cuts. But, when there was a categorical cut which never went through, there were a lot of us over there talking pretty intensively. Unfortunately, an awful lot of the contact that the Congress has with, not so much with copyright, also with the library, with people in general, is people use their things to voice complaints of one kind or another. And they're real complaints, they're real problems. But we need to have more of a united front on the value, the importance, the centrality of this mission to the creation and health of a free society. We're making this case. We're going to make it more. I gave a speech the other night in this room called "Is Alexandria Burning?" designed to put precisely this question: are we going to let this kind of heritage, the creative record of the American people, basically, which is what you people are the hardcore guardians of, making sure that it continues to come in? We've got a lot of problems, but we have a tremendous number of opportunities. I think people have generalized goodwill. They get all kinds of mixed messages about what we're doing. I would hope that this exercise can bring people together on this thing. But you asked a very specific question: who's looking out for us? I just want to tell you that's our main job, is to see, and it's a main job both in humanitarian terms, because our first responsibility is the people we in high positions basically serve, and it's also our job because in a rational sense there is so much that important that this institution has to do that we need more, not less people. So we're going to fight that one as our first order of responsibility all the way down the line. But we cannot guarantee the results because we're being in this kind of an atmosphere where people want to do categorical this, categorical that, and we may get, despite our best efforts. So that's all. But excuse me.
This is very helpful, and I hope throughout the process it's probably going to be impossible for us all to get involved as much as we would like to get or whatever, that there would at least be scheduled meetings like this so that we can stay continually updated and ask the questions to lessen the perceptions that may be out there.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. I'll leave that to Ralph, but it is 3 o'clock, and Ralph, you want to close off?
I just wanted to add to Dr. Billington's list of people who are fighting for your job security and for your welfare. I too
South Bend, Indiana, as well. All right, thank you.